You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. I've got a great guest today, Charles Vogl. He's an advisor, a speaker, and author of 3 books, including an international bestseller called The Art of Community, which I'm listening to on Audible, and it's really excellent. So we're going to talk about building brand communities. And Charles has been an advisor in the past for Google. He's worked with Airbnb, LinkedIn, Twitch, Amazon, ServiceNow, Meetup.com, Wayfair, and the U.S. Army. So worked with a lot of different organizations, very diverse ones, very interesting ones. And I think his insights on community building are really going to be very interesting for listeners. So welcome, Charles. Thanks for coming.
I'm delighted to be invited.
Yeah, tell me about your past. Were you a hermit and then found community, or how did you get into this area of thought?
Well, it's been an interesting and dynamic road. Way back in my 20s, I served in the U.S. Peace Corps in sub-Saharan Africa in a remote village in northern Zambia. And I remember while I was doing that, that was the first time being exposed to a village life where 150 families live together and nobody's that far from anybody else and everybody knows each other. And it's so much different than American life, just how much people look out for each other and how much they take care of kids as literally a village. And it was really inspiring to me just to see how people could live that aren't all sequestered in individual homes watching cable TV at night. And then working a number of issues there, including some human rights challenges that came up. And I largely burned out, came home feeling burned out and exhausted.
Quick question here. How come, what burned you out about it, if you're able to share?
Well, I was there in the midst of the AIDS epidemic. And so, death from that pandemic was, death from that epidemic was significant. And trying to make a difference there just seemed overwhelming. Right. There were big forces at play. And then at one point, my best friend in the village, who is Zambian, Mr. Puta, was kidnapped by the local government, really put pressure on me because I was trying to find the money that had been stolen for a clinic that had been begun and abandoned. And of course, the money had been taken by someone who didn't want it to be found. And so the way the local government handled that is they kidnapped my best friend and held him for a bribe as a warning to me not to keep looking. And I didn't have a real job because I was a Peace Corps volunteer and didn't have a family to support. So I had plenty of time to try to work on these human rights issues and the clinic that would, if operating, serve hundreds and hundreds of families. And, no surprise, it was a big challenge. And there are cultural forces and political forces that get in the way of, in this case, bringing medicine to kids.
Right.
And I burned out. I thought I had failed in everything I wanted to do. I found out years and years later that I was wrong, that the work that I'd begun in that village named Lupa Sochi continued. And some years later, that clinic did in fact open, in part because of the groundwork that I and the villagers who worked with me did together. Well, the work continued and a clinic opened. But I didn't know that when I got back. I thought I had just wasted a lot of energy in a place that I cared about, with people I cared about, and it was all for. So when I got back to the United States, I started working a number of projects. And one of them, I started making a documentary film, though I had no experience doing that, about a Cambodian family that survived the Cambodian genocide and became American. And there was a lot of fundraising we had to do, and there was a lot of legal stuff I had to learn, and of course, all the filmmaking parts that I didn't know about. And it was in the midst of this project that a mentor of mine sat me down and explained that I was using a Superman strategy of trying to learn all I could and do all I could and be effective at everything. And that was not going to generate the kind of results that I wanted to create. And he explained that if I wanted to make the difference I wanted to make, I need to learn how to invite people in according to shared values and purpose and learn to work together. And he gave me some simple math. He said, if you ask 10 people a week and 9 out of the 10 of them say, go away, I don't want to talk to you, you're stupid. But one of them says, yeah, I'll work with you. Then a year later, I'd have a team of 50. And that was deeply inspiring and inspired me to learn to build those muscles, if you will. I went on to study religion at Yale for about 7 years. I also studied philosophy and ethics and business. But amongst the things I studied was religion. And one of the things that really struck me in my studies was that we can study spiritual traditions that have been bringing people together for over 1,000 years. And some of them are so successful that in the moment I was learning about it, I could leave that room and find the people who are still gathering in that tradition. And that was deeply inspiring to me. So I got out of grad school. I had the experience of being a PBS genocide filmmaker, and now I had a degree in religion and didn't know how I would possibly contribute to the economy. And one of the lunches I had when I moved to the West Coast was with a friend who had started a tech company called Twitch. And he shared how what he really wanted to do with the company is bring people together who are already members of Twitch in ways that would connect them better. And he was already confident Twitch would grow. So after that lunch, I went home and I wrote what I thought was going to be 10 pages that my friend Kevin could use in his relatively new company. And it turns out I had more to say than I thought after all these years of experience and the years studying. And that turned into a book. And the first publisher that saw the book wanted to publish it. And now you're listening to it on audiobook. So it's been a very cool, fascinating journey.
It's interesting. The village you were in sounded to be like a Dunbar Number size village. I believe the Dunbar Number, the number of people that you can know, which I guess to get any degree of familiarity is about 150, I think, for a group.
Well, my understanding is Dunbar's 150 people, and this was about 150 families, and the families can grow quite large. And then there are relationships with other villages that are not very far. So I don't know how many first name relationships any given villager had, but you couldn't be a stranger. I was a stranger nowhere I went for my whole time in Africa.
Yeah, maybe we can revisit that a little bit. So what was the social dynamic like, versus like maybe other big cities that you've lived in? What are some things that jump out at you?
I don't even know where to begin because the cultural differences between a Zambian village far in the north is so different from any city I've ever been to. It's mind-blowing. I'll just tell you, when I first got there, I was exhausted. And that's very common because our brains are trying to process so many changes: diet, climate, food, language, culture. It's just overwhelming for someone's brain. So Peace Corps volunteers are often exhausted when they get to the village. And I noticed I was largely hiding in my little mud house, dealing with that exhaustion. So I just committed at one point to leave at least an hour a day and visit one neighboring house in my village and just sit with them for an hour in what they called it in Saka, or Americans might call it a hut that has a cooking fire in it. And I knew that culturally it was entirely appropriate for a neighbor to come and sit in Nsaka, because Nsaka was considered a semi-public place, as if someone came to your front porch and sat with you on a bench. It wasn't an invasion of your home. And the villagers knew who I was, and they knew I was going to stay there, and they knew I wasn't dangerous. So there was no problem with that. And so I would go and I would just sit in Nsaka with a new family every day, and I would time myself for 1 hour. I'd force myself to be present for 1 hour. And keep in mind, I just learned the name of the local language, which was Bemba, a few months earlier. And I could say phrases here and there, but by no means could I have a conversation. And I certainly couldn't have a conversation with villagers who spoke at the speed of as a fluent speaker, which is to say there was a huge communication barrier right there, there. And in my memory of that, it's so powerful how generous they were to let me, this stranger, show up who could barely talk to them and just sit amongst their kids and sit with them while they did the most mundane chores. And I don't think anybody in my neighborhood would be okay with that. But not only was I totally trail of that, of course, after I'd done this 2 times or some such, the word got out that I was doing this. And so people expected me and they welcomed me. And of course, I was always fed. And this is a place where 1/3 of the year was called the hunger season, because it was a very, very sober name for the season. But I couldn't go anywhere where someone wouldn't offer me food. That kind of generosity.
It sounds like you were like a cultural anthropologist, hanging out with people.
I learned a lot by being in another culture and living with people who I didn't understand, and I was a stranger to them. I wasn't there under any research pretense or academic aspirations. I was there to learn and before I left, find a way that I could contribute. And as I said, I struggled, and I thought I totally failed, and I fortunately found out I was wrong years later.
Well, what did you discover by sitting with people doing mundane tasks? Were any memories of that were interesting?
Oh, well, one of the lasting memories that I've taken is just how much I then took for granted, and how much we as Americans take for granted all the stuff we have. aspirin, ibuprofen, antibiotic cream, antifungal medicine, just to begin with. I don't know a single person in my neighborhood who'd be shocked and elated because someone showed up with antifungal cream for an itch. But if you live in a village in northern Zambia, there isn't any antifungal cream, and that itch is going to vex you for a long time. And then our water was over 1 kilometer away from a little river. And the way rivers work is they're at the lowest point of the topography, which is to say every time you wanted water, you had to carry all of it uphill for 1 kilometer. And I was a weak American. I was a 20-something-year-old young man, but a weak American. And so I had jerry cans. And the first day I woke up and I didn't know where to get water. I knew villagers knew and they would help me, but I didn't know where it was. And I started walking toward the river. And quickly, a very large group of children joined me to escort me and watch the new stranger to the river. And then, of course, they filled up my jerry cans because they knew how to do that. And it was obvious that I couldn't carry them back. And they threw them on their heads and walked uphill 1 kilometer to my little house, which I could not do. And let me tell you, when you see the strength of people who do this every single day, maybe several times a day, and my own weakness to confront that, when I saw my own weakness, I'm confronted with just how overwhelmingly easy seemingly everything in my life is. And the great thing about experiencing that experience and all the other experiences that came in that time in my 20s is it gave me perspective. And I still have it today when I face challenges. And I'll give you an example. I've written several books now. And on occasion, I've met people who say, oh, I could never write a book. It's the hardest thing you can do. And I tried and I saw, and go so on and so forth. And then I've seen people post on social media about how they've written a book and it's the hardest thing they ever did and so on and so forth. Well, I tell you, keeping kids alive in an epidemic with no medicine is way harder. Trying to build a clinic with money that's been stolen by the local government where there's no paved roads, way harder. And so I'm never confused when I sit down with an iced coffee in a heated room at a keyboard in front of a big screen and write. I'm never confused that this is a tough and difficult life. I have a mission. I hope I'm making a difference when I share things that people take in, but I'm not struggling. And I'm delighted that I got that anchoring experience in my 20s.
Well, do you feel like you're, I don't know, do you feel like the people like in the US or other first world countries, do you feel like you have impatience with them because they haven't had this experience and they don't know what hardship is compared to the hardship of like this village? Like, how do you feel about people here?
Well, we all have our own context and we're wrestling with our own challenges. Life in the United States is not easy. In fact, when we look at, wealth trends, things are getting harder. People are working harder, they're making less money. Healthcare is less accessible. I will say that when I finished the Peace Corps and was traveling thereafter and recovering from some maladies I got while serving, I was definitely at a point where I would be around packbackers also in their 20s. And the kind of things that they would whine about and were challenging for them, I couldn't hear. Because after you've been living in a place where so many kids are dying and the life expectancy is under 40 years old and there are human rights abuses, other things, I'm hearing about people not being able to fit their shoes in their backpack, or I'm hearing about how they had to wait longer for a train because something was canceled. Like, it didn't sit well with me.
What about the happiness of the people in the tribe versus the happiness of people here? Do you think that being exposed to adversity, do you feel happier or more content, or what do you see in the people around you?
Yeah, I'm pausing because, I lived in a Zambian village for just shy of 2 years. And one of the things that kept happening is I kept learning how much I didn't understand and didn't know. And so even though I'm one of the very few people I know who learned an African language and lived in a village and worked with villagers on health issues, I don't know the culture. I can't speak for anybody who grew up that way. And I've heard people coming back from, say, volunteer trips in developing countries, how, well, those people don't have very much, but they're happy. And I'm certain there's truth in it. One of the things that I got present to working in Zambia was that, yes, villagers are happy because they have each other. They have song, they have dance, they have rituals. They're surrounded by friends who deeply care about them. They're part of lineages that are connected to the land that they take very seriously. And they don't like their kids dying. And they don't like being in pain. And they want access to medicine, and they don't like fearing the government, and they want stable access to food, and on and on and on and on. And I am not in a place to say how happy or not happy they are, or how much happier they are to, say, Americans. And when we say Americans, there's a big bell curve of how Americans experience the wealth of this country and the comfort and safety of this, a huge bell curve. So I'm not in a place to say that, but I can say that I became aware that it's more complicated than I hear people talk about it, who visited for less time than I think they need to have authority about sharing how things are in very different places.
So when did, I guess your time in the village shaped how you view community, just like your time in any other place? Was it your experience with Twitch where that led to you writing in the book about community, or what experiences led to that?
Yeah, it was the conversation with Kevin, who's one of the founders of Twitch, that inspired the book, because that's what alerted me that there are people who have the capacity to connect, in the case of Twitch, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people, and they don't yet have access to the knowledge, or I would say wisdom, of how people have been connecting in meaningful ways for generations. In fact, I remember at that lunch, Kevin said he didn't know how to do that. He didn't know how to connect people more. They knew how to build technology. They knew how to invite people into the platform, and they were really good at it, but they didn't know how to connect people. And I remember when I was at the table, my head almost exploded, because sitting there were all these things I wanted to share with him that people have been using, these time-tested wisdoms, for well over 1,000 years. And of course, I couldn't say them all at lunch, which is why I had to go home and start writing. And of course, as I mentioned, it turns out there was way more to say than 10 pages. There was a whole book and now several.
Yeah, you had a good background, and being in that village and being in, like first world places, and then, all those experiences of working with Twitch and, studying religion too, which is a community, some of which have been around for a very long time. What are some of the aspects, like when you first started thinking about this, I'm sure your thinking is different now, but what are some of the aspects for listeners that haven't read the book yet that help communities to form and stay cohesive and be successful? Maybe just name a couple.
Well, one of the principles that I noticed there's a misunderstanding about in our time is this idea that if we're going to bring people together we care about into a strong community. And let me define that. In my work, a community is simply a group of people who share mutual concerns for one another. I don't care if you play the same sports, you wear the same clothes, and you like the same food. I don't care. I only care, do you care about each other? And that's really important, because we live in a time where a lot of people say they're building community, and often they're just compiling a list of customers, a list of attendees, a list of donors, a list of fans. And by the way, nothing wrong with that. That's just not a community, it's a list. And I actually coined a term for that because it's such a problem in our conversation, and we call that a mirage community. It's when someone says it's community, and maybe from a distance it looks like a community of fans. When you look closely, it's just a list of people who get eaten, for example. So when we want to bring people together in community, as I'm defining it, there's often this misunderstanding that the way we build community is we invite everybody to anything all the time. And that sentiment is often rooted in a very generous place. This idea that if we're bringing people together, let's be super generous, invite everybody all the time. But that doesn't work. And for a couple of reasons. One, if you don't have a boundary where you know who's inside and who's outside, then you don't know who should be there. If everybody can show up all the time, or everybody should show up all the time, then there's no particular people that can show up. And then you can't invest in the people you want to invest in. And I'll give you an example. I'm a very serious downhill skier, and I train with ski coaches. And when we gather, guess what? We talk a lot about skiing and weather and gear and technique. And my wife doesn't want to hear it, and I don't blame her. When we gather, people who don't want to talk about skiing should not join us. It's not going to be fun for them. And then if we accommodate their interest of not talking about skiing, that's going to be lousy for us. That doesn't mean we don't like my wife, or she's not a good person, or she can't hang out with us. It's just an understanding that when we're gathering as enthusiasts, we need to be clear, well, who is this for? And the way I name that is I say that we're gathering people around shared value and or shared purpose, at least one, and one can be enough. You like downhill skiing and you do it. And if you don't have it shared values and purpose, it's not clear who you're gathering and how you invest in. And we call that the boundary. I need to know, who do we invite into the boundary? But the boundary isn't there just to snob people out. The boundary is there so that we can understand, well, what are the values and our purpose we're looking for, so that we can invite people in so they can find the right people. And then we create an intimate space inside that boundary.
Okay. How do you take just a gathering of people and make them into a community? Like what would be the first step or two? I would guess, like if you're trying to form a community, when would you get early signs that it's going to work or it's not going to work for whatever reason?
Well, I don't think there are early signs. I think you have results from early efforts, and then you have to adjust or not. And relationships take time to form. Communities only develop at the speed of trust, and trust develops in relationships, and relationships develop because you invest in them. And if you don't invest in them, you're not going to get relationships. Full stop. And I know there are a lot of people who like to brag, especially online, about creating communities in one concert or one festival or one retreat, but largely they don't. Largely, they have lists of attendees. And if you think of the people that you would call if your house floods in the middle of the night, people that you know care about your welfare, you probably didn't develop those relationships in one party or one festival or one concert. Those relationships almost certainly developed in a series of intimate conversations over dinner, over a campfire, sipping a beverage that led to a place where if your house floods, you're confident you can call them and ask for help. Am I right about that?
I don't know if people know how to invest and how to build a community. And
Was it a real one? I'm curious. Am I right about that? When you think about the friends that you would call, did you form those relationships over one festival or one concert? Or did they feel like there a series of conversations that were intimate?
yeah, it takes quite a while. And there has to be opportunities too sometimes where all of a sudden you can go to a higher level of intimacy with somebody. Like something happens to them or something happens to you. And now all of a sudden there's that test without it being a test. It's like, hey, this bad thing happened. My car broke down. And so said, I can't help you. I'm sorry. I'm busy. But so-and-so said, oh yeah, I'll come help you. And you were like really surprised they did. And that deepened the relationship. It seems like, I know it could happen organically over time, but I don't know. I would guess everyone's in a rush to do it.
It seemed to you like it happened organically over time, but there are things that we can notice that took place. Like there's a reason that I suspected that you develop those relationships over time with multiple experiences. And that's why when I'm talking about building community with leadership, the first lesson I like to bring up is what I call the power of invitation. And that's because I've noticed we live in a time where people like to skip the invitation. In my work, an invitation is a request to spend time where a person invited knows that someone cares if they show up. I'll say that again because it's important. An invitation is a request to spend time where the person invited knows that someone cares if they show up. If you're asking for people to spend time with you, but they have no sense that anybody cares if they show up, we have a name for that, and that's called an announcement. And I've noticed that we live in a time where people like to push out a lot of announcements and then complain that they're not getting a lot of engagement. And when we're looking at building community or growing community, one of the first things I'm looking for is, well, who are you inviting? How are you inviting them? And what are you inviting them to? And if the answer is we invite no one to anything because we shoot out an announcement, and we invite them to things where there won't be an opportunity for a possibly intimate conversation, then I know that nothing else is going to work. And with some irony, I know nonprofits and schools that have been caught in this. They complain they're not getting a lot of involvement, and they're inviting nobody to anything that will invite them to an intimate conversation.
I don't know. It seems, how do you break the ice, I guess, with a community? Like who goes first and how to really start forming it?
I guess I'm confused by the question. Somebody has to want to connect with people they care about. And that has to start with an invitation, a request delivered however is politically appropriate. If you send me a text that says, hey, we're having drinks on Saturday night, you should totally be there. That's not a compelling invitation for me for a number of reasons. One is I don't drink alcohol. Second, I have a young boy, and so I'm not out drinking on Saturday nights. But that's not a good invitation for me. There are a lot of people where that's a fantastic invitation. So someone needs to consider who they want to invite, and then consider an experience where there's the possibility of an intimate conversation, which is to say in a place and a space where it's not so loud we can't have the conversation, or it's so crowded that we're just going to be in a crowd, or so entertaining that we're going to be distracted the whole time. It's okay to go to something entertaining. It's okay to go to a noisy place. But if that's the only experience, then we're never going to have that experience for the intimate conversation, which we're going to need to create a series of intimate conversations, which will lead to a relationship when knitted together with others, create a community.
If someone wants to create a community around the business they have or the product they sell, I don't know, is that a real reason to do it, or is it self-serving? Like, how can it be done in a way that's pretty virtuous?
And it's very difficult to work successfully, and that's why most of them fail. And the reason is, very often when businesses say they want to build a community, they bring what we call an extractive lens to the experience, which is to say, they say they want to bring people together around shared values and purpose, but that's underneath the priority of getting something from these people. It's usually money. It's also often attention and time, but there's usually money. And if everything is transparent about that, that can go well. And there are examples where that went well. However, if you think of your life and you consider the next 50 weeks of your life, you probably already know how many of those weekends you want to spend with people who are only inviting you because they've calculated they're going to get more money out of you if you show up than money they're going to invest creating the experiences that you'll attend. Am I right about that?
Yeah, right. If they just want to extract money out of me, what's the point?
And we haven't even talked about what they're inviting you to do or who they are or what you're excited. We haven't talked about that. You already know generally how much you want to go. So you can see how difficult it is to bring that lens. And one of the things I talk about in the Art of Community is that for a successful community to work, as I'm defining it, people care about one another, a generosity is required. There needs to be at least the perception, and hopefully accurately, that the people involved in the community are generous. So I'm curious, what is your sport? If you go out to do a sport, what is that sport for you?
Oh, well, I did swimming, did, Tai Chi for a while, that kind of stuff.
Great. So so Tai Chi is the kind of sport, and you correct me if I'm wrong. You learn very slowly. It's really challenging, and you never master it. Am I right?
Yeah, it takes years and years and years.
And you have to do that with somebody who has spent even more years learning it, who's patient enough to watch you do it poorly. Am I right?
Right.
And my guess is you only want to spend those hours with someone you think is generous with you. Am I right?
Yeah, if the instructor doesn't really care about you or it's just transactional, right? Like, why would you be there?
So it may be transactional. Instructors need to get paid. There's probably a space cost. But if it was strictly transactional, that would be no fun for you or way less fun. And said differently, you perceived, hopefully rightfully so, that there's a generous relationship in that community. And my guess is if your instructor and or those other students had a broke down car and say, hey, can you swing by and pick me up? I can't get to class this week. You wouldn't even pause. You'd say, of course.
Well, actually, I stopped because of the lack of community. Actually, it's a good example because I just felt like, for instance, we were in a long, narrow room and the instructor would be in the middle. I would get there early, so I'd usually be in the middle. Sometimes there would be other people. I'd say, hey, so-and-so, you can come to the middle. I know this part. I'll go to the end. You can see better. But unless I engaged with people, no one ever engaged with me or literally said a word. And I knew these people really well after a while. And that lack of care, it just became like meaningless. And I'm like, I don't want to go here anymore. So I stopped.
This is a fantastic example where my guess is if twice a month you spent 90 minutes drinking barley tea and having rice crackers with some of your classmates, that would have been a transformative relationship to that training.
Yeah, it would have been much better. If I came and they said, hey, Rich, how you doing? I said that to them, but they just, I guess one thing I learned too is the person that's running the event really sets the tone on how to behave. Like, I'll give you one more example. There's one guy, I would go to a lot of his marketing seminars and he was really mercenary. And I would ask people, hey, you want to go to lunch and all that? And they wouldn't do it. Like, no one would do anything. And then I went to a seminar with another guy and the whole time he's like, we got to help each other. You got to be there for each other, blah, blah. And some of the same people were at this other seminar and their behavior was totally different, much nicer because he told them how to behave. So I realized like, wow, the leader literally tells people how to behave in a group, either good or bad.
I couldn't have said it better. And because we're all getting cues of what are the rules of a space from the host. And that host had different rules and people lived in those rules differently. And what I love that you highlighted about your experiences, it had nothing to do with whether the training was good. It was a fundamental shift in your training that you had a group of people that you thought understood you emotionally and intellectually, and you perceived cared about you in a generous way, and that's where your energy went.
Yep.
So what more can I say about how we start communities than what you just shared?
I can see, some of the ways that you get people and you grow them into it and you keep a community where people care about each other, right? I guess it just, it seems counter to, like I said, running a business and saying, oh, you know what, I would love to make a community out of our customers, where they do interact with each other and they do hang out and all that. I remember Saturn, the car company, would have meetups where all the Saturn owners would come and hang out. I think Jeep does that too. I haven't seen many businesses where that happens. It's like, I don't know how many of them try, but it just seems to be a very rare thing.
There's quite a bit of talk of it, and I'm certain there are really good examples. In my understanding, most of it is marketing framed as community building. And the way that we can recognize that is whether the people who are forming this are doing it either exclusively or overwhelmingly motivated with an extractive relationship. Where we find success is when it's not purely extractive.
What happens if you create a community, but then there's bad actors in it? Like you also, it seems like, have to do policing.
We call that in my work, keeping the inside safe. So if you invite me to a Tai Chi retreat and I show up and I'm really there because I just want to sell books, and it becomes clear to you that I have not a lot of interest in Tai Chi, I have a lot of interest in selling books. If you don't encourage me to stop in whatever is the appropriate way, and then eventually ask me to leave if I don't stop, then you will have polluted you have toxicity in your Tai Chi community, right? Because it's not there for selling books, right? And you need to recognize then in that particular scenario, you're the host. And participants are looking to the host to keep the inside safe. And as soon as they understand it's not safe, i.e., they're going to have some author hawking books at their Tai Chi retreat, they're going to leave.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's the boundary principle I referred to earlier. You have to ask yourself, is Charles here because he wants to learn Tai Chi? And does he have the value of doing the hard work and supporting others who are doing it as well? Or is he trying to hawk books?
And then you have people too that get to a certain status, maybe a senior status within a community, and they may then exclude the people that are not as high a status as them, or create subgroups that aren't really unified to the community desires either. They kind of wrest control of a small subset and, change it to their will.
So there are healthy and there are unhealthy ways that we can mature in a community. And I think your example of Tai Chi is a fantastic one. My guess is you already know that in Tai Chi, as one matures, part of the responsibility of being a more senior practitioner is teaching a less skilled practitioners. Am I right about that?
Yep, I had to do that. Yep.
You had to do that. And my guess is you wanted to do that. Am I right?
Yeah, when they would listen, some people would listen and some people would just ignore you. So I was like, all right.
Right. But that
you
wanting to teach and being ignored and wasting your time, right? But you wanted to teach.
No, some were good, and I helped them, and they were very thankful, and it made me feel good.
Right. So in a healthy development, as we become mature in a community, and in your case, Tai Chi, one of the things that are important is that elders contribute to the community. And if they don't, then that's fundamentally a selfish relationship. Right. So I'm a pretty advanced skier at this point. I'm a credentialed ski instructor in America. When I'm on the hill and I see someone struggling on an intermediate run because they don't have the skills and they're panicking for their life, it doesn't matter how good the snow is. I stop and I help them calm down. And then I coach them to get to a safe place so they're no longer panicking. And I know that they're going to get to where they need to go, with all their limb. And I see that as part of my relationship to the sport, that I have skills others don't have from hard work. And I need to help the people who don't have that and are in danger. I don't just whiz by them and say, see ya, suckers. I hope you don't, get a concussion from what's coming. And if I did, I'd be a jerk, and I would have a selfish relationship to other people sharing a mountain and trying to enjoy a sport that takes thousands and thousands of people to make work and make it safe. And if I had a community of skiers, people would hate me.
This reminds me, I've gone to some cities, and even if I have a couple of interactions with people that are, sometimes I've gone to a city and there's been people that have been really nice to me, and I like that city because of it, even though I only met a couple people. And sometimes I've been to a city where a couple people are jerks, and I'm like, man, I hate that city. Just based on a couple of interactions. It's weird. Like, everyone that is in a place is an ambassador for that place. They can turn it from, oh, I love San Francisco, or I hate San Francisco, or I love Dallas, or I hate Dallas. Just based on a few interactions. It's very interesting,
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, where I'm at in life is my belief is that I'm constantly surrounded by people who want to help. They're often not helping because they don't know that they have permission to do that, and or they don't know how they can. And I'll give you an example. I was in the grocery store recently this year, and there's a woman in front of me, and as she got to the register, I saw her patting all her pockets over and over again. And then she leaned over to the register operator and said, I lost my credit card. And I heard her and I said, oh, I'll handle it. And she was shocked. And quite frankly, it wasn't a lot of groceries. Not that it mattered, but it wasn't a lot of groceries. I said, no, I got it. And I've learned to say, I'm sure you'll pass this on in the future. Am I right? And she said, of course. I said, great, we're okay. Very simple act. My guess is you would have done the same. Am I right about that?
Well, there's a few items. Yeah. I've helped people like that before. Why not?
You've lost a credit card. Like, you can have $15 of groceries for someone who honestly lost a credit card.
Yeah.
So there's only two of us in this call, and both of us would buy groceries for somebody who just lost a credit card and, it's a bad day. I believe that I'm surrounded by people like us all the time because we're not that special. $15 off their credit card would make a big difference, or that they have permission to help without exposing us for being incompetent or, desperate. And I've found walking through the world with this attitude is truly amazing. How many people step up and want to help if I give them opportunity to do that?
What happens if you have an interaction where someone's selfish or a jerk to you? Like, how do you not let it color your attitude and change your mind from a positive expectation to a negative one?
Well, first of all, it totally does, because I'm normal. And one of the things I've learned is that everywhere I go, all over, people are handling really messed up stuff. And they're distracted and they're exhausted. And sometimes they're barely holding on. And I've been that guy in my life. And sometimes I have to remind myself that they could be in a place where they just don't have the bandwidth to be as generous or as patient or as courteous as I want them to be.
So do you feel like your positive expectation insulates you against the occasional negative interaction?
I think it insulates me from a lot of them. I'm like everybody else. People make me mad when they do things I don't want them to do.
Okay. Oh, that's excellent. Any examples of communities that have formed that were like, wow, I didn't think this would happen? Like you were shocked by it. Maybe not anymore, but knowing what you know now. Any examples of that?
Nothing's coming to mind where I was shocked that it forms. I have this understanding that we are surrounded by people who desperately want to connect. And unfortunately, you and I, we're living in what might be the loneliest time in people's history for a number of reasons. And so what I'm more shocked about is how lonely we are all together. And I'm more shocked about how low the skills are amongst us to create the connections that we long for. And I'll give you an example. I've talked about this invitation power across the country now, actually internationally. And to me, it's a very simple idea. If you want to bring parents together, or students, or medical professionals, or military people together, you got to start with an invitation. You got to invite people to stuff. That is a radical idea for many people. This idea that they need to invite people to things. I wish I could say differently.
What do they expect to be invited and not to invite?
I think many of us want to be invited more than we're invited. But I think many people don't understand that how critical it is that an invitation is extended and that it's extended over and over again. And we extend it over and over again because people are busy. They're taking care of sick relatives. They're working 2 jobs. They're fixing things at their home. They're not available when we're available. So let's not make it just a game of gamble. The one time this year I'm inviting you to something to see if you're free. Why don't I invite you 10 times and see if you can join any of those? But to do that, we need to make sure invitations are happening. And I wish it were not a radical idea. By the way, anyone who's listening doesn't think it's a radical idea, God bless you. I mean, they're way more advanced ideas, but I found that I have to start here.
What have you noticed in the people you invited? Like, does it take on average like 3 invites to get somebody, or are there different types of like avatars or people? Some that'll say yes right away, some that'll never say yes, some that take a long time.
I don't keep track of the ratios, and one of the reasons is I kind of like it when people say no. And let me clarify that. I don't like it because they're saying no. I like it because if you're going to take care of a sick family member and that's why you're not going to come to my place for dinner, I want you to take care of your sick grandmother. And I know that because I invited you, you know that I want you to join me. And you know that I would like you and me to have a relationship where we share dinners. All of that good stuff happens when you say no. It would also be great if you said yes. But no isn't bad. Go take care of your grandmother, or go study for school, or go prepare for that vacation you're going on. I want you to be prepared for your vacation. So since I know that good things happen when I extend an invitation, people say no, that means I can extend a lot of invitations, and I do. And I often extend more invitations than I have room for. And what I can say is, hey, we're having dinner. We'd love for you to join us. Please get back to me while I still have room. And if you get back to me 4 days later and I don't have room, it's not because I don't like you. It's not because it wasn't a real invitation. It's just the table's full. And you know that, and I know that, and I can invite you to the next one.
What are the reasons that people would be afraid to say yes or don't say yes? Have you studied those? Have you cataloged those?
There are many reasons, and they're often subcultural. For example, I have a lot of friends from grad school who are women, and I can invite them to come to my home for dinner, and they do, and we have a good time. There are many cultures where if I even speak to a woman, that's a problem. There's cultures where if I even speak to a woman who's a married woman and invite her to my home, that's a deep problem. Doesn't make it bad or good. It's just radically different. And if I don't understand that, I'm going to keep getting no's, and I might blame them, but it's really about me misunderstanding what do they need that's culturally appropriate given gender dynamics or power dynamics that could make the possibility of a yes. And that's why I don't tell people what does an invitation exactly look like or what's the best invitation, because I don't know for you, but I do know for my community. But we share geography and language and a shared culture and understanding, and married women can have dinner in my home. And as long as we don't do anything that would violate some commitment, it's all good.
I just wonder, why some people, even if they want to go to a place, they're afraid, they feel awkward, they don't know how to talk to people. It's been so long, maybe they feel like the other people in the room are above them. I would guess there's many reasons that people have trepidations and they say no without even wanting to say no. Like they do want to come, but they're just afraid.
So I'm having difficulty answering your question because we can theorize an infinite number of reasons people invent not to do something. And in this case, we haven't even picked what they're not doing. And so I don't have a specific answer. What's coming up for me is we need to consider who we want to join us, neighbors, family members, Tai Chi practitioners. Consider, well, what would they like to join me to do? And my coaching on that is only invite people to do things that you like to do. And the reason is, if you invite people to do things you don't like to do, when they show up and do that thing you don't like to do with you, we can almost guarantee how much they're going to come back and do that. So I encourage you to start with what do you like to do, and then invite people you want to know better to do that thing. And if you're getting more no's than you expected, then there's some research for you to do, which might include asking them, is there something about inviting you to share burgers that is a problem? And maybe we should do something else. And they might say, yeah, I don't eat meat. And then you say, good, got it. Let's share frozen pizza.
Like, what kind of feedback did you get from your Art of Community book? Do you get people asking certain questions over and over? Or, what kind of feedback have you gotten?
Well, I can honestly say the response to the book has been startling to both me and my publisher. When the book came out, I was a nobody. I had a religion degree. I wasn't the president of any professional association. And the book is entitled The Art of Community. The second edition is coming out in 2025. And it's hard to remember now, but back in 2016, when the first edition came out, people were talking about community. And when I said I'd written that book, I got the impression people thought I wrote about singing Kumbaya at a beach. And then subsequent to the book coming out, the Surgeon General announced that our country is in loneliness epidemic. And then the pandemic happened, where we were all separated even more after we were living in a loneliness epidemic. And I wouldn't say all at once, but certainly in a way we didn't predict in 2016, the book became really, really relevant. And it's been adopted by some of the most admired organizations in the world to be used around the world. And I can tell you it's really, really moving. And for those who haven't read the book, I like to believe, I don't know if it's true, but I like to believe that everything I put in that book are very, very old ideas. They're not based on new research and fads and trends. These are ways people have been coming together for millennia. And so I'm very proud that when we shared old wisdom in our new era, that when there's so much pain, so many people found the book and understood, recognized, wow, this is what could make a difference. We bring people together around shared values and purpose in small gatherings, making sure there's invitations, and we support each other to grow. And it's more involved in that, in the book, but it starts this very, very simple wisdom that we can recreate forever.
Do communities have a life cycle and stages?
There are stages of growth if you scale up. I don't think all communities should scale up. In fact, I think often when they scale up, much of the value is lost. The original value is lost. And I write about that in my latest book, Building Brand Communities, about how we grow up and we create segments, we call them. There's no guaranteed end of a community, but many communities end. People grow up and they move on. The project that you're working on is ended. You become a master Tai Chi practitioner and you move to a new state and you start teaching people there. And that community that you're in is going to change radically, maybe die. The community dying as an entity is not a problem because what continues are the relationships. And hopefully when you start practicing Tai Chi somewhere else, you'll still have the relationships that you developed when you were at this more junior stage in your maturation.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it is helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
What's next in your book writing roster, or what project are you working on now that's up and coming?
So several things. The second edition of The Art of Community is being released in 2025, and I added 25% to the book, in large part informed by the changes we've seen in the country because of the pandemic, and I'm looking forward to sharing that. I'm working with a number of schools of creating a guideline for educators so that the events that schools are already creating and already spending money on will be better at connecting people as opposed to just serving catering. I'm also talking with a group that works with military families and veterans on doing a better job in connecting family members, which are they're too disconnected than we need as a country to support the families that are supporting the war fighters that are doing hard jobs. And then I'm continuing to lead workshops and provide keynotes as people invite me around the country.
One last question comes to mind. What if, you feel like so many people that you need software to track them all? Like you you just know so many people. You can't call them all for their birthdays or there's just too many. Like, so maybe what you end up with is just a bunch of pseudo relationships, but not really deep ones. Like, what do you do if you have an abundance of people you know?
So there's a difference between knowing somebody and then, what I'm going to call friends. And there are a few models and how we can model out what kind of friends there are, single digit number of close friends and a bigger number of, friends that you can call for favors and so on and so forth. I don't think it's really important that any given person, models out their friendships. What we need to remember is that in order for friendships to remain strong, we need to invest in them. If I never call you or check in on you when you're sick, our friendship is probably not going to remain robust. And that, is a matter of time. I need to have time and spend time investing in our relationship. And then that becomes a math equation. There's only 52 weeks a year. I'm only awake so many hours a day. It can't be 10,000 people. And this is where the Dunbar number is relevant, because Dunbar says that we can roughly only connect with about 150 people. I don't know how firm the Dunbar number is. I don't know if for some people that number is 210 and for other people that number is 110. The point is it's not 500. And so we need to prioritize the people that we want to grow relationships with in our lives. And I do know too many people so that I can't remember all their names and where they are and who they're married to and and their kids. I can't do it. And so I do use software to help me with that. With that said, there is a group of people that I really invest in growing those relationships. And they're local, because we know that local relationships drastically improve our life, where we know that the numbers of people we know on social media do almost nothing to improve the quality of our life. And so to answer your question in short is you need to choose people you're investing in and invest in them.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, very good. So for listeners that want to understand how to create communities and good ones, what's your recommendation? Should they start with The Art of Community first, or is there another book that you've written would be a better start?
The best place to start is The Art of Community. That book discusses fundamental principles that we find in long-standing, enriching communities. And then on my website, which is charlesvogl.com, charlesvogl.com, I have a whole series of downloads and notes and articles that are all free for the download. And if you want to start a conversation with the community you're part of, be that political or geographic or athletic or spiritual, you can use those downloads to start a conversation about how to knit together the people that you care about.
Well, very good. Charles, thanks so much for coming on this podcast. It's been a really good call. Very interesting.
Well, I'm happy to share what I can. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.